May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio Podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, helping to preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have a guest, David Cohen. David Cohen is not a Zen student and has never been a Zen student. He is not a Buddhist and he has never been a Buddhist. And thus, he qualifies as a guest for Cuke podcast. However, he's been around some of these people who do all that. David's sister is was the illustrious Darleen Cohen, who, along with her husband, Tony Patchell, started, I don't know what it's called, the Zendo, the Zen group in Guerneville in California. And she was a real character. She was really great. So David came out here, and because she was his sister, I got to know him. So he's also been around the Zen Center doing things, helping out. He's a mechanic, he's an electrician, he's a plumber, he's in recent decades, he's more like tech support. He has often been tech support for Cuke Archives and other sorts of phenomenal assistance. He's really good at diagnosing things. Like, for instance, I had this really irritating sound. It wasn't totally irritating, but it was irritating that I didn't know why my car was making it. I let him do a test drive of it. And he came back and said, "You've got luggage rack flute." And what it was is I had a luggage rack. I always put luggage racks on top of my cars. Even I had a little Honda Accord. It was a really nice car then, when they were just coming out in demand. And I had the dealer put a luggage rack on it. Anyway, this was a Toyota. Probably a Toyota Tercel, yeah. And it had a luggage rack. And the luggage rack was made with like aluminum sort of piping. And I think it was like square piping or rectangular piping. And the plugs on the front ends, or maybe the plug on one of the front ones, and maybe on the back it'd come out. So as the car was driven, he explained to me, the wind going through it turned it into a flute, and it was playing. Anyway, he figured that out right away, and nobody else had. So I always thought he was really good at diagnosing things, and so I thought I would share that with you. So David and I have been in touch, and socialized quite a bit from around 1980. And so I called him before I was going to call him for the podcast. And I called him the day before just to, because we hadn't talked in a long, long time, And so we talked 2 hours. So I thought, all right, we have it out of our system. But actually, for this podcast talk, I had to cut 30 minutes out of it. And a lot of it, is, if you're listening to this podcast because you want to improve yourself or attain enlightenment, it might be disappointing. In fact, it might be disappointing with any of my podcasts because we're actually an anti-self-help organization here at Cuke Archives. But you might find it instructive in other ways. So he talks about being at Green Gulch Farm as the mechanic. And, he says it wasn't that long, like a year. But he was there a lot. And some of the things he mentions were in other years, I know one of the things he said was 1983. And so anyway, early 80s, I'd say around Green Gulch. No, I can remember him at Green Gulch in 85, 86. So, he'd come in and do things to help. He wasn't coming there to practice meditation. He mentions at that point he and Christina Huggins got married. And I really blew it at that point. I should have gotten him to talk about his wedding. But it just didn't occur to me. One thing we do talk about toward the end is our disappearing minds. And he's got some sort of condition. I don't know. He seems okay to me. But we brush over that toward the end. But anyway, David and Christina were married in a redwood grove in Larkspur, I believe. I can see it now. I love that place. By Silas Hoadley, who was one of Suzuki Roshi's closest students and disciples, who died last year, not that long ago, and who was a wonderful guy, really solid. Everybody liked Silas, really down-to-earth guy. And so God, he probably would, David, if I brought it up, he would, and there are things to say about the wedding, but I can't remember what they are. Put them in an email, David. And I'm going to make you a little page now on Cuke.com. Maybe you already have one to put a little bit of this stuff on. But here, at the wedding, after the wedding, Silas gave David and Christina the wedding, it was like a Xerox of the wedding ceremony. And it was mainly, it was very short, but, Silas said things extemporaneously. All right. I'm just reading it off in Cuke.com. I just wrote in the site search box, David Cohen wedding Silas, and it came up. All right. Wedding message. You have been married here in this sanctuary. Christina, you have been joined with a husband. David, you have been joined with a wife. Your parents, your friends, all things have brought you here today. Your marriage will give confidence to others. This is the way to live and fulfill your lives. Please take care. Treat each other as the source and make the everyday life your teacher. Know your unconditioned selves. Courtesy and kindness, even in adversity, are the doors of compassion. Love is the fruit of compassion. Originally composed by Shunryu and given to you by his disciple Silas, August 25th, 1984. So isn't that the shortest wedding ceremony? So, now, I guess that's it. I guess it's time to give David a call, as we say here. And have our pause to meditate first, though. I just came across a liberally translated version of Talopa's 6 words. I think it's called 6 words. Talopa is, oh God, who was he? He was maybe he was the successor of Naropa, or maybe he was Naropa's teacher, I forget. Anyway, he's one of the great ancestors in Mahayana Buddhism. And Talopa had, here, I can see what he calls it. Talopa's 6 words of advice. There's actually 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 in English. Maybe it's 6 words in Tibetan. It would just, there might be a negative ending for the verbs, which happens in a lot of languages. But in English, we have the negative expressed with a separate word. In this case, don't. So here's Talopa's advice, his 6 words on meditation. Oh, and one reason I'm saying this is because David, he told me once he can't meditate. His mind's just too busy or something. Of course, that's one reason why people meditate, because their minds are busy. And the continual practice of meditation tends to slow that down, reduce the grip of the thought stream. So here's Talopa's 6 words on meditation. Don't recall. Don't imagine. Don't think. Don't examine. Don't control. Rest. So the last one's positive. I mean, it's not a negative construction. Rest. Of course, you can't, in meditation, now this is my 2 cents here, you can't not recall through any effort. It's like that book, Don't Think of a Pink Elephant or something. Don't recall, don't imagine, don't think, don't examine, don't control, rest. Anyway, that's meditation. I love it. And what is meditation? It's basically nothing. And that's what Zen is to me. It's basically nothing. But in other words, not doing anything. It's, you might say, well, we're practicing, we're doing sitting and walking meditation. Yeah, but the whole point is to have an experience of just being ourselves without adding anything. So anyway, enough of all that. Here we go with our pause to meditate. So when you hear the bell, if you're of such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're ready to come back, hit unpause. And we'll be there to hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever. And we will give David Cohen a call.
Hello there.
Hi, how you doing?
Hi.
You're someone I wanted to talk to for one of these podcasts because you are you've been a fly on the wall a lot, and so I'm sure you'll have your own unique perspective of the Zen Center. Just one angle, but. Tell me, what are you up to these days? How's it going with you?
Actually, not a whole lot. I've just gotten out of a tumultuous relationship in a very final way in that she died.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of been picking up the pieces from that and figuring out, the lessons there and this and that. And so basically that's all an excuse for I haven't done shit lately. But I very happily have some plans. I'm going to embarking on a trip with one of my very oldest friends. And, it's been a long time since I've been on a road trip.
Where?
Looking forward to it.
Where?
Across Canada.
Really? What month?
Well,
what month are you going to start?
June.
Oh, yeah. That'll be good.
Yeah, he lives in Vermont, and he's coming west with his paramour, and they have a little travel trailer, but she's involved in some other business, and she's not going back with him. And so I'm going to accompany him for at least part of it. And we were talking about, what route we wanted to take, and decided that neither one of us has done Canada, and we've both done all the others extensively. So, so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Well,
I think I can cross the entire country and not have to worry about being shot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which is a prevalent concern. I mean, we have had twice as many mass shootings as days so far this year.
Yeah. Yeah. America's got a problem. Yeah, I'm very sorry.
Oh, you mean it's your fault?
I don't think that phrase "I'm sorry" implies that it's my fault. It means that, but I notice people respond that way. They say, "Oh, yeah, I hear that." But to me, somebody says my dog died. I go, "I'm sorry." They say, "Well, you didn't kill it." Yeah, well, I should say, I feel your pain. No, I should say, David, so you've been in the Bay Area since when?
80.
1980?
Yeah, I lived in San Francisco in 74, but I've been here continuously since 80.
And why'd you come out?
To be with your wife. So soon they forget.
Well, now, why'd you come out the first time in 74?
Why indeed? It was more the culmination of a cross-country odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
I basically built the very first RV there ever was. I got a step van and put a kitchen in it and made beds that folded down and had a TV and electricity and yeah, I mean, I did it up.
Wow.
And came out west.
Who?
And basically.
Who?
Who was?
Who and you left?
No, I came out with Heidi and her son, Greg.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't take to San Francisco and moved back in not quite a year. Moved back east.
Yeah. But you knew somebody in San Francisco.
Well, Darleen, actually, when in 74, Darleen was at Tassara.
Yes, your sister. I mean, that's one connection. Darleen Cohen.
Yeah, but I mean, but no, I didn't have anybody in San Francisco other than Darleen, who wasn't there.
Uh-huh. Did you see her at all on that trip?
I think in passing maybe once or twice, but we didn't spend any real time together. No, so the one time I was in San Francisco, she was at Tassara.
74. I was there in 74 too. Interesting. So
what was really interesting is that I found out that an old friend was also in San Francisco in 74, and if we had known each other were here, we would have certainly hung out, but we didn't know each other were here.
Huh.
And only found out years later.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Now you say you came out in 1980 because of my beloved first wife at the time.
Well, she was a great excuse. I was basically, the 80 was not a good financial year. I was in business for myself. The phone had stopped ringing. I was sick of winter, and I met your wife.
Where?
And,
when?
Oh, and more importantly, Zen Center offered me a job, and I'm like, all right, I have a girlfriend and a job there, and I have winter and shit here. I wonder what I'll do.
Yeah. Now, all right. So, if Zen Center offered you a job and you knew Diane, you must have come in contact with them in 74, right?
No.
How did that come about?
Oh, because I came to California every year to visit Darleen.
Oh.
So I had hooked up with Diane at Christmas time prior to my coming out in May.
Oh. And that was 1980. Oh, wow, yeah.
Well, it would have been Christmas 79, and then I moved out in 80.
Wow. Now, I would like to make this clear. She was she's now Diane back then, and I separated in 76. So you met her around that. Did you meet me? Didn't we meet?
Yes, we met very soon after. We met at that Christmas time visit. You called her, and I was there, and you guys talked, and she hung up, and she said, "My husband's on his way over," and I'm like, "What?"
That's funny.
So you and I met in 79.
Tell me more.
But I think the first person I met at Zen Center was Peter Rudnick.
Oh, is that right? And how did you meet him?
I was visiting Darleen. I was dealing cocaine. I was doing way too much cocaine. And I was a good boy. I didn't bring any with me. But when I came out, Darleen was at Green Gulch. And I think I was staying at Green Gulch. But I couldn't sleep. And I just wandered out to Muir Beach and watched the ocean. And I believe Peter came out, was down at the beach, also feeling, ocean meditative, and we just started shooting the shit. And if I remember correctly, got high. But
yeah, back then he just he was the he smoked pot daily when he was at Green Gulch, and people knew it. He sort of kept it down to the lower fields. But when you say you were dealing too much coke, you mean on the East Coast?
Right.
Yeah. And you came to the West Coast, and you had trouble sleeping. Yeah. Do you still have trouble sleeping?
That's funny. We had the poker game today, and that came up with the poker game. That people were talking how they were taking naps and the like. And I went, I'm the oldest person here, and I'm seldom asleep before 2 a.m. And they asked the same question. They said, well, do you have trouble sleeping? And I said, well, that's totally dependent on whether or not you consider staying up till 2 a.m. trouble. I don't. I've always been a night owl. So basically the main reason I don't get to sleep till 2 is because I don't even start thinking about it till 1.
Yeah, but that depends on how much sleep you get.
Well, right, because I don't get up till 9, so I get 7 hours.
Yeah, but I do remember you talking about having trouble sleeping.
I'm a lifelong insomniac, but I've just I gave in.
Yeah.
I don't consider it a problem. I just went, well, quit pushing the river.
Yeah. So you were there around Zen Center. What did you think? Do you have any observations?
My observation was that as cults go, it was about as pleasant as they are.
Anything in particular happen? Or
Well, I was having a lot of fun observing you guys from the auto shop. There were things I noticed, like if there was a radio in the auto shop, and if I played rock and roll, I would be spoken to fairly quickly, but that I could play classical music as loud and as long as I wanted.
Huh. That's interesting.
I remember, oh God, what's his name? Who was the priest who was the excellent pianist?
Lou Richmond.
I remember at one point, Lou took me aside to give me the pitch.
Yeah.
And I basically was very upfront about the fact that that's just not who I am, and that I found everything in Zen Center quite pleasant and everything, but it was not anything I had any interest in pursuing. And he accepted that without any problem. It was funny though, because afterward I turned to him and I said, well, I have to say that any group that embraces David Chadwick as a priest is okay in my book. And Lou turned to me and he said, you'd be surprised at how many people around here feel that way.
Wow. My goodness. Please continue.
I remember the first fire drill while I was working in the auto shop, and all the sirens are going off, and everybody's running around. And if somebody ran past me, I just said, "What? Did somebody make a break for it?"
That's good. Did you knew Richard Baker, who was the abbot then?
Yes.
And I remember one thing he said to you. I think he said it to you, or he said it to you and Darleen when you were together. Do you remember?
Well, I know he said that we were the most alike of any siblings he had ever met.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, and he just went right down to the limp.
Oh, right down to the limp. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Did you get along with him?
Yeah, actually, I got along with his, what's his name, his brother-in-law better, but...
Brother?
Was it his brother or brother-in-law?
Brother-in-law, you mean Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Jenny's brother, his wife's brother.
Uh-huh.
Tim Brackett.
I was fine with Dick. I found him a little pretentious and self-important, but that's what he was doing. I mean, it was appropriate to what he was doing, so I didn't find it to be terribly obnoxious or anything. I know that when the scandal broke, that Darleen felt very personally betrayed by him in that he had been her confidant and she felt betrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I idolize Darleen. If Darleen doesn't like you, I don't like you. And I do remember Dick's last day at Green Gulch.
Mm.
He was pulling out of the parking lot in his BMW as I was walking by, and the BMW sounded like a bucket of bolts. And I turned to him and I said, "Dick, you got to get that car work done." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I can't afford it now." And I just smiled and said, "That's okay, Dick. I'll give you my Zen student rate." Well, it's so nice working with people who you can just straight out deal with. Like when Mark was work leader.
Yeah, Mark Alexander.
Yeah. I remember going to Mark one day and saying, "Mark, you need to double my hourly salary." And he said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Because the amount of work you'll get out of me at twice the money will exceed. The work you will get out of me will exceed the money you're paying, and you will save money." And he said, "Okay."
Huh. Well, you were probably getting very little.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Because, if you are anything but a slave there, you're making a lot of money.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Hmm. So, I remember when you and Diane at the time, you all were living down at Muir Beach, right next to what's that woman's name?
Annie.
And you had
Ann Balfour.
Ann Balfour, and she had a son. What was his name?
She had 3 sons.
Yeah.
But the one who lived there was, God, I'm trying to remember. He was a little autistic.
Yeah, right.
he ended up working as a mechanic's helper for me.
Oh, what? You don't remember his name?
God, I even visited them in 2010, my cross-country trip.
In New Mexico?
Yeah.
Wow.
Annie's dead now. She died a couple, 3 years ago.
Oh.
But yeah, the way that happened was Annie put a notice at the mailboxes offering the cabin behind her place up for rent, and rent was negotiable. And I went to talk to her, and when she found out I was a mechanic, my official rent for that cabin in Muir Beach was $100 a month and keeping her 2 VW buses alive.
Why did she need 2 VW buses?
One was transportation, and the other was a flatbed. One of those rare VW flatbeds.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember how you arranged to have a nominal electric bill there? I think for both of you.
Well, no, actually, it was pretty much for her because she was using electric heat and I had a little Ben Franklin stove.
Oh yeah, right.
Whereas her fireplace was that monster made by Junior, and it, if you weren't gonna build a fire to keep going for a month, it wasn't worth it. What happened was that I forget. Oh, I remember. What I did was I pulled the seal off the meter, and I remember it's because Annie was running her space heaters. She blew the meter out. So I went out, I broke the seal, I opened up the meter, and the wiring was really fucked, because it was ancient. So I went and got some, proper wire for it. And I shunted one side of the meter so that the meter was only registering one leg. So that basically the meter was registering half of what was going on. And then what I did is I took the burnt, decrepit wires and I hung them from a little string from the meter and put a note on the meter saying, these wires burned out, and that's why the seal was broken. I replaced the wires, and they put a new seal on it without looking. So it was a sealed meter. There was only registering half.
Didn't you actually run a wire from the pole?
No, I just bypassed the meter in the meter box.
Oh, I see. I had the wrong idea back then.
Oh, that might have come from the story of my cross-country trip in '74, in which my electric power was 2 big alligator clips with spikes, and I'd climb up telephone poles and spike into the line.
Wow. And just put.
That's how I got cross country. Mm-hmm.
Did you use batteries, or did you have to do that when you were stationary?
I did that when I was stationary.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's nervy. Huh. Well,
me nervy? Oh, come on.
Huh. So, how long were you working at Green Gulch?
Not very long, because I got there. Well, at first I was working in the city. The first job I did for Zen Center was I rewired the sewing machines at Alaya.
Really? Huh.
Yeah. I did several things in the city center, and then I went out to Green Gulch.
Huh.
And that coincided with Diane getting the place on Sea Cape.
Oh, is that when Diane moved from the city to there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I looked at that house with her, and she looked at a little room down below, and that she was planning on renting this little room at the bottom of the house. And I asked the landlady, how much does the whole house go for? And she said that. I said, Diane, if you move here, I won't need to have an apartment in the city. And so we'll take the money from both our rents, and that'll be enough for this house. So she rented the whole house. And she continued living in Green Gulch. I mean, at Muir Beach above Green Gulch for years. She moved a lot. Huh.
That's where I went after my motorcycle accident.
Oh, my.
I went from the hospital to convalesce there on Sea Cape.
At Diane's place?
Yeah. I remember when Diane visited me in the hospital. She was very upset, and it wasn't concern. And I remember I just interjected and just said to her, I just looked at her, I said, Diane, if I told you that I have resources and I'm not intending for you to nurse me back to health, do you think you could be nice to me? And she turned and she said, well, if that's the case, yes, I can.
But you did go to her place afterwards.
Right. But I made it clear that, that was just where I was going from the hospital.
Yeah. That was a serious accident. It was beyond Stinson Beach. Do you remember what happened?
Pilot error. I was going around the bend right in front of the Bolinas School.
Yeah.
And then, at the end of Stinson. And I was on that curve and hit the guardrail and screwed up both ways. First in hitting the guardrail and second in not getting my leg up fast enough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It was fun. I was visited in the hospital by a group that wanted that guardrail taken out. And indeed, if that guardrail hadn't have been there, I would have just ended up in a field going, shit.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And I talked, there was a woman who was a waitress at the Sand Dollar in Stinson, and Katrinka was a waitress at Sand Dollar back then, who said she was, she was a paramedic or something. She said she was the first person to you. And she said,
yeah, I remember that. She was great. I love her because they take you the mountain road to Marin General. So you go over the Bolinas Road.
Yeah.
Which is all twists and turns. And I've got a dangling limb. And that is not a fun road with a dangling limb.
Wow.
She was great because I'm there in the back and I'm going, shit, this isn't like the movies at all. I'm not going numb or passing out. This just hurts like hell. And she said, yeah, that's the way it really is. And she said, if it's any consolation, the more pain you're in, the better shape you're in, because it means all your nerves are alive and working.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, we're hitting bumps and going around curves. And she turned to me and she said, come on, you're a biker. You can teach me some words I don't know. Come on, start really cussing.
That's funny. Yeah, I liked her. Actually, she's the waitress I was closest to, not Katrinka. Katrinka and I would just say hello. Well, another thing I remember is it took a long time for your leg to heal, and it was very hard. They had to do various things to try to get it to heal.
I was like 10 months on crutches. I really remember. I also remember that time in there was a party near Tam Junction,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm there. We're all there at the party, and at a certain point, I had plenty to drink, and you came over to me and said, "Would you please sit down? Everybody here is waiting for you to fall over, and there's nothing more pathetic than a drunk cripple."
That's at a party at Tam Junction, huh? That's funny.
Yeah.
Another contact you had in the Zen world was you lived in the room in the back of Steve Stuckey's home in Mill Valley for quite some time.
Right. That's when Greg, my stepson, moved out here, and Steve Stuckey and I were single fathers together.
Oh, yeah. Boy, you and Steve Stuckey, what a combination.
Really. I remember when I asked good old uptight Mennonite Steve Stuckey if he minded if I grew pot in the backyard. And he said, "Let me think about it."
Uh-huh.
And he came to me the next day and he said, "Well," he said, "on one hand, I'm really against the drugs." But he said, "On the other hand, I like the idea of you growing it for yourself. So, yeah."
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well, he was very, very open-minded and tolerant. My God, he had Renee Pate staying in a room. I mean, Renee Pate was there. He was like on parole from prison, or if that wasn't prison, he'd been in maybe that was before prison, but he'd been in some sort of trouble. I mean, Renee he had a violent streak. And once Steve came in and saw Renee shooting up, he said, "Renee, we had an agreement you wouldn't take drugs." And Renee said, "But it's the weekend." And another time Steve sees Renee, he's putting on a gun. He's wearing a gun on a shoulder strap, right? And Steve said, "Renee, you can't stay in this house and have a gun." He said, "Well, a guy needs protection, I mean, they're just these two different worlds, much further than you and Steve. But you and Steve, I mean, that's quite a leap there, because Steve was like, he was pretty righteous dude, but he was actually tolerant of the kids smoking pot.
Remember when my father bought me that gallon of wild turkey, and that was the night you saw the UFO?
No, I don't remember it.
Oh yeah, you drank a whole bunch of wild turkey and saw a UFO on your way back to Muir Beach. But in any case, that was during the flood, and we had like 2 feet of water going through the house.
I do remember that.
As a matter of fact, my most vivid memory of that was you and I were in my room listening to music, and we were sitting on the floor, and you turned to me and you went, "That's weird." And I said, "What?" And you jumped into the air, and when you came down on the floor, water squirted from the baseboards. And you said, "I thought we were floating."
I said, "What?"
"I thought we were floating."
Uh-huh. Well, more than that.
And you detected that we weren't on the ground.
Wow.
But what was funny was after we drank all that and you went home, I got Steve Stuckey drunk on his ass.
Really? Oh, I never.
Yes.
Wow, what a corrupt.
And we were.
Never saw him in anything but a very clear state. That's pretty good.
Oh, we were sitting in the kitchen with. It wasn't just with 2.5 feet of water below us, but we're sitting in the kitchen, knee high in water that's flowing. It's coming in the kitchen door, going through the middle room into my room and out my door. There's a channel going.
Yeah.
And I'm, and I'm giving shots to Steve, and Steve's really drunk.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, Steve looks at me and he's got this horrible panicked look on his face. And he says, "I'm going to be sick." And I just looked at him and I gestured to the water flowing by and I went, "And the problem is what?" And he just turned his head and barfed into the water and it went by,
Wow. Wow. Well, you know what I remember most about that is going into your room, wading in water, and you're listening to music, and the electric cord is going down into the water and plugged in.
And I keep being told that somewhere there's a photograph of that, and I've never seen it.
Huh, that would have been good. But you would have had to have a video with sound. That there was actually... You were hooking up to electrical outlets underwater that you were standing in, and I said, how could this be? I didn't think this was possible. And what'd you say?
And I said, California has incredibly soft water, and water, as people don't realize, water does not conduct electricity. The minerals in water conduct electricity. Distilled water will not pass.
Yeah, that was quite a flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it shows the advantages of having soft divorces, because we ended up taking a canoe over to Steve's wife's place across the street.
Oh, right. His ex-wife.
Right.
Yeah.
But they lived in proximity for the kids, just like Christina and I lived in proximity for the kids.
Ah, yeah, right. Well, have you lived, did you have any other contact with Zen Center people? Oh, yeah, poker.
Poker.
Years of poker. Now, what people around Zen Center? Peter Rudnick, and you still see him for poker.
Right. Peter Rudnick was just here.
Oh, you played at your place?
Yeah, we played at my place today. It rotates.
Ah.
It rotates between Berkeley, Muir Beach, and Sebastopol.
Ah. Who in Sebastopol?
Loring.
Oh, Loring. Yeah, Loring Vogel. How long were you at Steve's?
A year.
Is that all? God, I just remember being over there so much, and I just dropped by on my way.
Yeah, I was there for a year, and then I met Christina, and Christina and I started living together in San Rafael.
Well, what happened then?
We got married, had kids.
And now you're in Berkeley, and you manage the apartment house there, so you do have a job.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you know how the joke used to be living in Marin, that in order to live in Marin, you have to live in Marin?
No, I don't understand.
That there was no way to actually break into the real estate market?
Oh, You have to have already been living there. Right.
Right, right. So despite having, 20 years of contacts, when I went cross country in 2010 and got back, I couldn't, I couldn't find a place in Marin. And I ended up in Bolinas, renting from Huey Lewis's mother.
Oh, right, Magda. Yeah, I remember that.
And then I did some house sitting, and then I found this place on Craigslist, of all things.
Huh.
They were advertising for a building manager, and I had a pre-interview over the phone. And the guy said to me, he said, well, you're over in Marin. He said, I hate to make a trip. We've already got a couple of qualified candidates. And I just said to him, I said, yeah, and your qualified candidates are probably students. They're going to be carousing on the weekends. They've got their studies and everything. I don't have an outside job. I live on Social Security. I'm going to be at the place all the time. And I interview very, very well. And I said, the only problem you're going to have with me is I'm going to work slower, but you're not paying me by the hour. So what do you care? And I got the job.
That was a long time ago.
11 years.
Ah. You and Darleen come from, where were you born?
Columbus, Ohio. And as Darleen used to say to me, she said, our parents wanted two bright, sophisticated children and got them and had no fucking idea what to do with them.
I remember your father. Did I know your mother?
She made it to Green Gulch
when
Ethan was born.
Oh, yeah, Darleen and Tony's son Ethan. And what did your father do?
My father was a salesman, a lifelong salesman. Two of the things that really come to my mind, because my father and I didn't get along, but I kept hearing the stories about what a great friend my father was. And I always was sort of jealous that I wasn't his friend and that I was his son. Because from what I heard, he was a great friend. But he was a really shitty father.
Uh-huh.
But I remember he was self-employed his whole life. And when I was like 8, he lost his business because of illness, because it was a one-man show and he was in the hospital for a while.
Mm.
And so he had to go to work for someone else for one of the first times in his life. He went to work for his biggest competitor, who of course was happy to have it. But I don't know what happened that day, but clearly it had a bad day. And he gave me advice I'm sure no other Jewish boy ever got from his father. But my father came home from work and he looked at me and he said, son, don't ever get a job.
That's great. That's great.
But the poignant part is how he followed it up. He said, son, don't ever get a job. When you get a job, you're letting someone tell you what you're worth. Don't ever let anyone tell you what you're worth. Wow.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The other great thing my father said to me one time, he was about my age when he said this to me. He had just come out of the bathroom from shaving. I was visiting. And, he had clearly been looking at his face for a while. And he just turned to me and he said, son, I've been waiting my whole life for a disguise like this.
That's funny. Now, here, I have what did your father sell?
Anything and everything. When I was growing up, he was, the consummate traveling salesman. He had a van, and he had clothing and appliances, and it was one of those deals where if he didn't have it, he could get it. He charged more than the local stores, but he brought it to your door, and more importantly, he gave you credit. And he was on your doorstep the day the welfare checks came out to get his $2.
Well, I have the impression he made quite a bit of money because he lost quite a bit of money. And why don't you tell us about that?
Well, I was sick of Vegas before I was old enough to get in the casinos. I mean, that was family vacation, was Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Darlene and I always used to say, no, take us to Monte Carlo. You want to gamble? Fine, take us to Monte Carlo.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, he won and he lost. I remember right after he died, Darlene said to me, she said, well, I guess we'll never see Majorca. And I'm like, what? And she said, oh, you didn't know, did you? And I know what? And she said, remember when Mom and Dad went to Spain and Mom really fell in love with it? And I said, yeah. And she said, well, Dad bought a villa in Majorca with some winnings. And I'm like, what? I almost inherited a villa in Majorca? Well, what happened? And she said, he fell on hard times and sold it. But, there for a little while, we were in line for a villa in Majorca.
Wow.
And I just turned to her and I said, what nasty things did I do to you that you had to tell me that? That I don't have a villa in Majorca.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, so what did you do with your father's ashes?
Some are on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Others I took to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And I'm going to scatter them in the casino, right?
Yeah.
So I figured you had him in life, you can have him in death. So I expected a commotion. And I was, me, I'm not shy. I was all prepared to be dragged out kicking and screaming. Nobody got near me. And we all know every square inch is covered by cameras. And as I'm doing this and there's nobody, if anything, people are avoiding me, I realized I'm not that bright. People do this all the time. And they learned that we kick and scream and yell when you approach us, and they just sweep the carpet after we leave.
Huh. Do you remember getting a room there and what room you got and how much you paid?
No, I remember I went to Circus because I knew it was cheap, but that's not where I spread the ashes.
All right. Here's what you told me. You said you went to a, hotel gambling casino, and you told them,
right, It's MGM.
And you told them you were your father's son, and he had died.
Oh no, that is a completely different. I used to meet up regularly with my best friend from high school.
Yeah.
We would meet in Vegas because he owned a stereo store. He was my Sony connection. He owned a stereo store, and he would go to Consumer Electronics Show, and he would pay for my flight and hotel because he had me bogusly on his payroll, and he could take me off his taxes. And so the only time we got together at all was we'd meet up in Vegas. But the Consumer Electronics Show is at New Year's, and Vegas is a big deal at New Year's. So I fly in Vegas. He picks me up at the airport. And he says, I really screwed up. And I'm like, what? And he said, well, I didn't make any of the, I just spaced it out. I didn't make any of the reservations in time. I think we're going to end up in Spurs. And I said, no, let's go to the MGM. And he said, I've been to the MGM. And I said, no, let's go to the MGM. We go to the MGM. I asked for the manager. My father had been dead for like 3 or 4 years at this point. I go to the manager and I said to him, I said, look, I'm not trying to pull anything, but my friend and I were trying to get a room in Vegas, and my father's Joseph Cohen of Columbus, Ohio. So he goes off in his office. He comes out. We not only get a room, we got full comped, meals, everything.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
As a matter of fact, yeah, and as a matter of fact, my friend and I are having dinner for free in the restaurant, and my friend turns to me and says, God, I knew your father was a gambler, but he said, I had no idea. And I just looked at him and I said, yeah, I wonder how much this meal really cost me.
Right. That's the emphasis I remember is you felt that your inheritance was fattened the coffers of in Vegas. Yeah, well, and did you ever gamble there any?
I dabble when I go to Vegas. I'll do a little slots. I'll do a little this and that. And if I have $50 for an entire trip, it's a lot of money. I'm not in any way bitten by bugs. You have this thing we do. We go to Reno. We see like a show we wanted to see. Well, they were running things with the train and the MGM in Reno, where you could go to Reno for a weekend, see a show for only a few bucks more than it costs you to be home. And Christina and I, we have children, we're doing that pretty regularly. And we found that, a great adjunct to our trips was we'd get pitched for timeshares. And, and we do it because it was usually like $50 or something. And, and we're not going to buy. And, so it wastes a couple hours of our time. But we're getting, $25 an hour. We're fine.
Yeah.
So we'd let them pitch us. And as a matter of fact, I can usually get us out early. I do things like say, what is the APR? And they'd always say they didn't know. And I'd say, well, it's against federal law for you not to know. And they couldn't wait to get me out of there.
That's funny. Yeah, I've done that. It's very tedious. Very tedious. That's done all over the world. Trying to sell you timeshares, and you've got to give them like 2 hours to give you a pitch.
Oh, and Darleen and I got dragged with our father for a timeshare pitch in Acapulco.
Yeah, I had it done in down there, Puerto Vallarta. Yeah. So, I never gamble a cent when I'm there, but I've stayed a lot in Vegas and Reno going through, because it's sort of fun for a day or two.
Yeah, it's fun for a day or two, but especially if you don't have the bug, because then, there's nothing worrisome.
Yeah.
The other thing about my father, being a high roller, was that, when I finally did get to be of age, it got more interesting to go to Vegas because we'd go to shows. And because my father was, a high roller, the first 5 rows in any show, none of those people are paying. They're all comped. I saw Roy and Siegfried sitting where I had my palms on the stage feeling for the trap door and couldn't feel it. They were amazing. But the other thing about Vegas shows that you don't think of unless you're there, and that is, okay, so you're in a Vegas show, so sooner or later you've got your high-kicking nude chorus girls.
Ah.
Well, think about it for a minute. They are directly above you because you're on the edge of the stage. They are dancing their hearts out, sweating like little pigs and kicking their legs. And you learn very quickly to put your napkin over your drink.
Wow.
It's part of the front row for a nude review that people don't think about.
Wow, I've never done that. I've watched some shows for a little bit from behind. I was very impressed with the quality of the dancers and how much energy they were putting into it, but I never paid for a show. But that type of show, I have been to some other, I can't even remember. Wow. Hey, you didn't go into the Army. What did you do?
I had the time of my life not doing it.
Oh, please tell me.
Okay. It all started when I knew organically that I was never going in the Army. And the question was whether I was going to get away with it or whether I was going to go to jail. But those were the two options. Army was not an option. So first I just didn't register. And they find out about that pretty quickly because, Midwest, back in the 60s, early 60s, that's the kind of things that get reported. But I know how bureaucracies work. So when I got the really nasty letter about 5 years in jail and a $10,000 fine, you didn't register, I just sent them back a letter going, of course I registered. What are you talking about? And I got a letter back, oh, we're terribly sorry, come in and register. And so that time I did because, they're looking at me. So I registered. What was it? I got drafted.
Oh.
And but I refused induction. I was, I think, the second person ever in Ohio to refuse induction.
Really?
And I was extremely political at the time. And I mean, to the point that the day before I refused induction, I cut off my shoulder-length hair, shaved, and wouldn't go anywhere without wearing a suit because I knew the press was going to be hounding me, and I didn't want people to be able to go, oh, that damn hippie.
Huh.
I lucked out. I got this. I got a nationally known labor lawyer doing his pro bono. And when I went in to see him, he even said to me, he said, I was expecting some weirdo. And he said, you've got this really well thought out and all. And he said, but, he said, I don't really know anything. And I said, that's okay. I said, I've been in touch with the American Friends Service Committee, and they're prepared to send you everything you need, and I've got a phone number for you. And he went, great. But that isn't actually how I got out of that. Until I was arrested for refusing induction and not allowed to leave Ohio. I had been living in New York, working with national mobilization.
Against the war, National Mobilization Against the War.
Yeah, no, National Mobilization Against the War in Vietnam.
Right.
And I just went upstairs to the Lawyers Guild and talked to them, and they told me this great way to get out of the Army, which was simply they said, start writing your draft board, registered letters, return receipt requested. And he said, just make sure every letter's like 10 pages. And he said, copy it straight out of New Left Notes, make it as boring as humanly possible. And he said, and along around the 10th day, on page 3 of paragraph 5, make a request for an appeal. They won't read it. They won't give you the appeal that you have a legal right to, and your induction is illegal.
Huh.
So that's what I did. And indeed, it got thrown out. It was dismissed. I mean, I didn't even go to trial. It just charged, because I presented myself. I refused induction because I believe my induction to be an illegal act because I was not given this appeal. But what they don't tell you is that 31 days to the day after you do that, you get a new 1A, and 31 days to the day after you get the new 1A, you get a new induction order, and it all starts over again.
So you did it again?
Well, I went a little tangential. Since it had been a year since they had tried to induct me, they had to give me another physical. And so I took multiple hits of acid and went on that physical. And really had a good time, I have to say. It was the most enjoyable exchange with the Army I ever had. But the day pretty much ended with I couldn't believe it. It was like it was out of a movie when Marine Sergeant Muldoon, with an accent you could cut with a knife, took me in his office and he said, "Son, you're in trouble with that saying, son, would you mind if we sent you for a psychiatric evaluation?" No, I just looked at him and I said, "Well, do I have a choice?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, then I guess I don't mind, do I?" So they sent me to a shrink. I saw his report. The shrink was pretty cool because I just went into the shrink and I said, "Look, I told him what I told you at the very beginning of this." I said, "The Army is not a choice." I said, "You're deciding whether I go to jail or not because I'm not going in the Army." And I saw his report. He said, I had an extreme authority problem. But in any case, he wrote me up and I got a 1-1, which is a temporary psychiatric.
Yeah.
So it's only good for a year. So the day my 1Y was up, I called my draft board and I said, "I'm calling because my 1Y is up today. And I wanted to give you my, all my current contact information." And I said, and the reason I want to give you all that information is because I can't tell you how bleak this past year has been. Without you motherfuckers to fight, my life has had absolutely no meaning, no purpose. I don't know what to do with myself. And I can't wait to start in with you motherfuckers again. I never, ever, ever heard from them again. I didn't get a 4Y when I turned 35. I just never heard from again. I used to tell that story when I was draft counseling. And I said, what I learned here was that there's this very, very, very thin line of being more trouble than your word.
Yeah.
And if you make too much noise, they have to put you in jail. And if you don't make enough, they think they can win you over. It's a very thin line, but I walked it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was successful. I've always thought a neat book would be How I Got Out of the Army, and just have stories like yours, because I've heard a lot of great stories. And
You know the peanut butter one, don't you?
peanut butter?
Yeah.
No, tell me.
The story that used to go around, that, it's an urban myth, nobody knows if it's true, about the guy who gets drafted and he goes into his physical, and prior to his physical, he takes an entire jar of creamy peanut butter and smears it across his ass. So when it comes time for the testicle inspection, everybody drops their pants, and it's, what's that? And he takes a handful and eats it and goes, peanut butter. Gone.
Yeah.
I like the World War II story.
What?
About, they're rubber stamping everybody yes, and people come along, and 1A, and finally this guy comes through and he doesn't have any arms.
He what?
And he doesn't have any arms.
Oh, yeah.
And like he says, the sergeant, he goes, 4F, no arms, right? And the sergeant, no, stand over there. So he stands over there. More 1A. A blind guy comes through. And he turns to the other guy and he goes, you tell this guy what to do.
You come from Ohio. Did you go to any college?
I went to Boston State College. I've done a lot of advanced learning and all, but I can't do classrooms. I was a D- student, and I was the alternate for the National Merit Scholarship. Because I can do tests, I can't do class.
Uh-huh.
I took the college level examination program, and took it up to a second semester junior, and then did one semester of class and dropped out because I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
that's just not where I learned. I was ADD. I was ADD in the days when ADD was you're not working up to your potential. That was ADD.
Me too. I understand that.
Right, and I had adolescent onset migraines. You're just trying to get out of school.
Oh, that's terrible. Well, is there any ground we haven't covered that you would like to touch on?
Well, I love the fact that everybody always assumed that I was going to be very Buddhist because of Darleen, whereas whenever Darleen and I sat around, we joked about the fact that we used to joke that between us, we had the entire universe covered because I dealt in the physical and she dealt in the spiritual. So we were totally complementary.
Well, also there's another Zen group you were around some, is John Terrence, because you'd come out and we had a weekly dinner. I was living at John Terrence with, like up to 8 people once a week for a while there. That went on for a while.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you'd even every once in a while you'd come join us for the meditation. You'd say, I can't meditate.
I remember sitting around with you and John Terrence, and John asking me why I wasn't a Zen student, and I said, well, for one, I'm a disciple of Paulo Freire, and I don't believe in the teacher-student relationship. And John just looked at me and said, I don't have a problem with that.
You said you're a disciple of who?
Paulo Freire.
Who's that?
The guy who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Huh. My. Well, John Terrence has read everything in the world. He's one of the best educated, informed people I ever knew.
Frere's basic thing is that as a Westerner, if you go to a, quote, backward people and you walk in and say, what can I do to help you? You've just established there's nothing you can do to help them.
Uh-huh.
That how can you possibly, you need to see what they need help with. Maybe your idea of what they need help with is entirely different than theirs. Maybe it's an outgrowth of my inability to deal with classrooms, but I'm not big on teachers either. I mean, I think we all have things to teach each other. And I acknowledge that there are people who are gifted in imparting that knowledge, but, up to a point.
Well, there's really nothing you're saying that's incompatible with my understanding of Buddhism. But
well, but in the final analysis, for me, it's sort of why bother? I sort of, I don't even. It's sort of like Dawkins talks about his being an atheist. That it's nothing he has to think about. It's not anything he participates in.
Who said who?
Dawkins says.
Oh, Stephen Dawkins.
Atheism. That it's not something you have to actively do to be an atheist, and it's sort of how. I mean, it isn't. When I say it's my mindset, it's nothing I think about. It's not like I'm thinking in opposition. It's just. I'm not a joiner. I think I'm here to figure it out, and if I find things along the way that make it easier to figure it out, great. But I don't want to be taught. I want to figure it out.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's about, is figuring it out.
Well, yeah, that's what Buddha said. He said, don't take my word for it, investigate for yourself. And he said, be a light unto yourself. Yeah, the stuff you're saying is not incompatible with Buddhism. I mean, I don't know what Buddhism is. I was just looking at a quote from Suzuki, Junior Suzuki was my teacher. He said, I've been thinking about how to understand our way better. And he said, I've come to the conclusion there's no Buddhism and there's no Zen.
Well, see, my feeling, I'll take it one step further. There no Buddhism, no Zen, but there's no Buddhism, no Zen.
Yeah, I think that's also quite compatible.
So then I just fall back on where I came from in the beginning, which is. Yeah, and this is clearly why most of my friends are Buddhists, and I'm more comfortable around Buddhists, is because my ideas are completely compatible, and the only thing preventing me from being a Buddhist is my attitude is why bother?
Yeah, well, I remember early on at Tassajara. Oh, I think this when I was head monk, 74. A guy came to Tassajara as a guest student for, 3 days or something. And then he talked to me. He said, I think his name was Pierce Johnson, he said he was the chaplain for the 5 colleges in Pasadena. I can't remember what they are. Claremont colleges, maybe. And he said he goes out and joins various groups to see what they're like, and so he can understand. And he said every one of them, he asked people, what have you gotten out of this? What are you doing this and that? And he said, and they all say, well, I've gotten enlightened. I've met God. I've solved all the problems of my life, et cetera, et cetera. He said, I go around here and ask people, and they say, I don't know. But what's Buddhism? Well, I'm not really sure. Have you benefited from this? Well, maybe. He said, well, tell me, would you explain what this is about? And I said, no, I really can't, but I'm very pleased to hear you say that.
Well, and it seems to me that the adage that represents is the whole thing that, it's a horrible thing to know things, because when you know something, all learning stops because you know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say you know something, what you're really saying is, I can learn nothing more about this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you brought up Richard Dawkins, because, he has written and thought a lot about religion and atheism and all that. He's a little, he really has gotten into it in depth somewhat, a little bit, but still mainly what it's about is countering the idea of believing in in having strong beliefs in, mainly in there being an individual being that we call God, that's like, literalism. Almost all the anti-religious stuff I see is they're just countering literalism, which to me is the enemy of actual spiritual practice. And believing things is a trap. I mean, you can believe for a little bit or believe relative things, for a while it's all tentative, but being fixated on something, that's just, I don't know. That's what the Bible calls worshiping graven images.
Well, one of the more interesting things I heard him ever talk about wasn't to do with religion. He was talking about why we haven't contacted anyone in outer space.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, okay, we're talking about incredible distances, but he says, at this point we also know that there are billions of Goldilocks planets. So really, why? So he said, well, all right, let's take the Earth as an example because it's the only one we've got. So the trip from running water to a species capable of communicating off planet is about 4 billion years. And he said, but then consider what science is. He said, science is formalized curiosity. And he said, and there is only one end game there. The only thing that will stop science, because its appetite is insatiable, is when it discovers something it can't control and it kills everybody.
Yeah.
And he said, so if you take the 4 billion years it takes to go from running water to being able to communicate off planet to the amount of time it then takes to destroy your society is a geological nanosecond.
Yeah.
And that's why we haven't heard from anybody.
He's angry they all destroy themselves.
Right, before they can get discovered.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, various people have various thoughts on that I will not get into. Yeah, I always thought the science versus faith thing that they put on, TV with debates, I always thought it was stupid. Yeah, science versus faith.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, and plus, the way it's framed, it just makes science another religion.
Yeah, well, to me,
because that's how they're approaching it.
To me, my understanding, I mean, religion's a dirty word. I mean, it's a word with too much baggage to use, and so is the word God. But whatever it's called, spiritual Protestant, it's empirical. It's scientific. There is absolutely no conflict with science and actual non-fairy tale oriented spiritual practice. There is no possible conflict because science is about phenomena.
Well, I always fall down on the side of science, but on the other hand, when I hear people speaking of science as some great, wonderful, holy thing, I remind them that, when they are the atom bomb, the sizable who elected to the testing saying there's definitely a chance that you could ignite the atmosphere.
Right. They thought it might. There were betting on it.
Basically, scientists Oppenheimer and Allison will chance it. Right. And it happened again in England when they said, no, hydrogen bomb ocean, you're going to ignite it. And that, we'll chance it. So that's your wonderful, science will make everything better people who chance blowing up the world twice
right.
just to see what would happen.
Right. I remember reading about that, because I've had some involvement with anti-nuclear weapons stuff, much more than anti-nuclear power. And I've said about you. Yeah.
That Hamlin Piper gun. Right.
The World Suicide Club. The first A-bomb experiment, like you said, there were bets on what they didn't know how big it was going to be. There were some who thought it was going to destroy all of New Mexico. There were some who thought it might ignite the atmosphere and just kill everybody on Earth. But anyway, yeah. Hey, so what do you think about climate change?
Right. Well, what's there to think about?
Well, different people think different things. What's your observation? What's happening?
My chief concern with climate change is as a parent.
Is what?
And Jeremiah and I have.
Oh, you're a parent.
As a parent.
Yeah.
Jeremiah and I have discussed this and we agree not that this will happen, but that probably the only thing that will redeem the human race is that some weather event, some sort of disaster will decimate the population. I'm talking like more than 75%. And that event, if nothing else, will buy us another, couple hundred years.
Yeah. That's what Lovelock said. Lovelock, who created the concept of Gaia, that the world was a self-regulating being and our entity.
And I love it when people say, we're destroying the Earth. We're destroying the Earth. No, we aren't. The Earth will be just fine. It will find a new paradigm. It will find a new ratio that works. It just won't include mammals.
Yeah. Well, there's some people that think, Jerry Brown, one of the most visionary politicians, he thinks vertebrates are endangered. And Lovelock said he thought best case was an 80% die off of the human race.
Yeah. I don't think it's just best case. I think it's the only chance. It's just because we clearly aren't going to do anything. So
that's right.
I'm sorry, it's up to the planet.
Right.
It's up to the planet.
That's what I think. We'll see. but people think they're going to stop climate change by recycling something or.
Oh yeah, right. That's just like everybody's trying to talk about how great the baby boomers are. And the most sobering thing for me with baby boomers is that in recorded history anyway, and I know there's been little civilizations here and there that are exceptions, but I'm talking general rule. We baby boomers are the very, very first generation not to make it better for our kids.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the new generation, Jeremiah sent me this cartoon. It was so great. And it just showed a toilet paper roll with one little square of paper on it. And it said, the baby boomers have done to the world what the person who leaves one square of toilet paper.
Yeah. Well,
that's pretty true.
Yeah.
I mean, generationally, and I've certainly bought most of the stuff, but still, generationally, I'm embarrassed.
I'm not baby boomer. I'm the prior generation. Depending, sometimes, baby boomers, sometimes they started with 1946. I'm 1945, but sometimes they start the count at 45, but I don't think that's fair. I'm silent generation. Haha. We seem to have come to the end here of the biosphere, not the biosphere, but
well, we're pretty much to the end of that too.
I was reading one place that said, even if we destroy, at a certain level, down to say mammals, that we could regenerate the whole thing about 17 times in the predicted lifespan of the planet. It could just keep doing that, However, I'm a little worried about the radioactive material as nuclear power plants and all the different uses of radioactivity stop being cooled or are managed. How much is there? The Earth can absorb a lot, but I'm wondering about that and the chemical pollution. The number of microplastics now that are already inside human beings is very, very high. And
oh yeah, of course, don't you, that you have more bacteria cells in you than human cells?
Yeah, right. I know that, but that's not bad. That's normal. It's that we're getting, but not just microplastic. There's old things like mercury. Years ago, they were catching tuna in maybe 10, 15 years ago, they were catching tuna in the ocean to test them for mercury. And the level being so high, it was actually, if they threw the dead tuna in the water, it was already classified as hazardous waste.
Yeah, I remember, because it was one of my favorite fish to eat. I remember, a 20-year period where you couldn't eat swordfish.
Oh, why was that?
Well, poison, mercury.
Yeah. Well, the mercury is mainly from coal, isn't it? I'm
not entirely sure.
Yeah. There was.
And actually, you bring up that the water stuff with the water. Water's going to be the new oil.
Yeah. I've been hearing that for years. But yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wars over water and stuff like that.
I'm trying to remember his name. that friend of Frank Kilmer's. Oh God, I can't think. He was a younger guy, and Frank ended up stealing his girlfriend or something. In any case, he and I did a lot of California agricultural distribution.
Yes.
And his day job was he ran a solar company. And as a matter of fact, he retired from agricultural distribution a number of years ago because his biggest client was Saudi Arabia. And whereas he knew if he got busted here would slap his hands and he'd never get back in Saudi Arabia. And he was making too much money there to keep doing the illegal thing. But he made the point that his biggest client for solar power was Saudi Arabia. They know the oil's going away.
Oh, that's really interesting.
You know, another thing, things would be worse, except I remember when I read this, I must have read this 10, 15 years ago, that the Saudis have been on top of irrigation for centuries. But as technology improved, the Saudis know exactly how much water their crops are going to need according to how much sun they're getting. And they have solar panels to measure the amount of sun coming in. Well, of course, they keep records. And their records over a period of 20 years show sunlight, that the sun is not as bright as it was 15 years ago because of pollution. So that global warming would have happened even faster if we didn't fuck up the air.
That's true. Where there's been tremendous pollution, like in India, that's happened. I was reading, I read an article on why some of the places on Earth hotter and colder and this and that was one of the factors, that pollution can keep it colder. But meanwhile, people are getting sick below. So, how's your memory?
How's my memory? I find that I can remember things from the past. I mean, including 50 years ago, much better than most people I know. But short term, no, not just. I mean, I have to double check to make sure I have my pants on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I'm seeing a neurologist for all the problems I've been having lately. And, they ask you about your memory. And I say to them, I said, well, for one, I can't remember whether I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
And that I've been this way my whole life. I mean, I have this sense that it's getting worse, but it's a sense. I can't back it up. Because I don't remember.
Oh, yeah. Mine has definitely gotten worse, but not in a bad way. It's all right. We don't need to know all that stuff anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I get hung up on names and shit like that, but the stuff I need to know.
Yeah.
The only time my memory really gets in the way is like leaving the house without something I need, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson recently, on some major, news show talking about something. And he went, what's that, that person or something, or what's that thing? And it was some very basic word. and he just couldn't think of it. And I thought, I understand that. And I thought, this is going to be a problem for him. He has to be on top of it all the time. I thought he should just confront it and just say that as he's getting older, he's having, like, I consider it like having whiteout spilled over the text that I'm reading now. I'm going, whoops.
Well, you know what I heard put forth, and and I mean, on one hand, it's so much shit, but it's nice to think about. They said the reason older people can't come up with things, right off the tip of their tongue is we've got a lot more files to go through.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that, but I think some of the files are also empty.
You think there's disk corruption?
Yeah. Lou Richmond's description of coming out of being deep in a coma for a long time was like that. And I use it all the time. It's like, if your speech and everything and your memory, if you think of it like streets with houses, you go in the house, there's a room, then there's file cabinets in it, and you open one of the drawers in one of the file cabinets, and you pull out a file folder, and you open it up because it's going to give you the word that you're going to say next, and boink, it's empty. I've experienced that. But mainly, on short-term stuff. Mark Alexander once told me proper nouns start going at 35. I don't know where he got that, but that's always seemed about right to me. But some places it doesn't matter so much. Here, remembering names, Japan, remembering names, you can use other words. I just remember it. I remember in Japan, it was just never a problem having, like if you have a friend come up, you can't remember their name, you're talking to somebody else, and you don't want to be rude, or you can't it's all taken care of somehow. I don't know. I can remember that. And here it's not a problem.
Well, my trick for that was that I actually sat down and forced myself to memorize the term nominal aphasia.
Right.
And so when I forget someone's name, I say to them, "Hi, I'm sorry, I'm actually not a self-centered, selfish lout who can't remember other people's names. I have this disease, nominal aphasia."
Right. That's a good term. That's a good term. You know what my mother used to do, and I tried to teach Katrinka this. Katrinka's very quiet, My mother, and I was, my father died when I was 11, so I was with my mother socially a lot, and somebody would walk up and she'd say, "Oh, David, you remember Mrs. Smith?" And I'd say, "Oh, of course. How are you doing, Mrs. Smith?" My mother always was right on top of it and covered that. Well, David, listen, we've been going on now for almost 2 hours. So I think...
haven't we, though?
Yeah. And we did the other day, too. The other day we talked over 2 hours.
Well, I mean, we do indeed have a lot of catching up to do, but...
Right. Indeed. Well, listen, thanks for your insight into Zen Center, Zen religion, global warming, and getting out of the Army and things like that. And I'm sorry about the death of your friend recently. I know that was hard, even though you weren't together anymore.
Yeah, well, of course, the animosity is the first thing to die.
Yeah.
As time goes on, I find her death affecting me more because I've let go of all the things that had us apart.
Yeah. Yeah, when Liz died when I was in India in 2011, and Liz and I broke up in 1985. Our 9-year partnership or whatever, it terminated then. And we were always, well, the first 5 years she was mad at me, but after that, we were very, very, very close. And Katrinka and I visited her before I went to India. And when I learned she died, and she died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage, I was teary-eyed for 3 days. So,
well,
yeah,
when James Kenny, one of the more recent people to join the game, he came over early and he offered condolences. He knew Molly, and he offered condolences, and I said, yeah, I said it's weird since we had broken up, and he was right on. He just looked at me. He said, look, this is somebody you cared about, somebody you loved, and they died. It sort of doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, David, it's time for us to move on with our busy, important lives.
Absolutely. Think of all the people who depend on us who are suffering as we speak.
Right. Indeed. It's been a pleasure talking to you again. I'll see you on Facebook, and briefly, and until we meet again, thank you.
Until we meet again.
Yeah, and it's been fun.
It's been fun. Have a wonderful whatever.
Yeah, you too. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, David Cohen. And from one David to another, it's been good knowing you. May you live long and prosper. I know, let me tell you, this guy has come closer to death in so many different ways. I think I'll spare you enumerating them. But anyway, still with us, and that's very good. Okay? So, this has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Dogget Bandita and dear lovely Katrinka, and we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.